I've got with me today one of my favorite people in the mortgage space, Eric Levin. Eric, thanks for joining us, brother.
Anytime you're asking, I'm saying yes.
Dude, this is a funny conversation because I think you were the first podcast I had ever been a guest on.
No way. You didn't tell me that.
You had invited me and I'm like, a podcast? That sounds awesome. You were doing it before a lot of people broke their podcasts out.
That shocks me. You never told me that. I wouldn't have expected that. That's interesting. And that was a great, you're still the first one that we went so long that I had to split it up into 2 episodes. And I remember we talked about UFOs, which really got me. That was a lot of fun. Oh yeah. We talked about, because there had been a big sighting around that time. And we got some fun clips of talking about UFOs.
Yeah.
Which I don't think they're called UFOs anymore. Are you seeing these congressional meetings now where they're UAPs? And I can't even remember what UAP stands for. It's so ridiculous when the government decides they should change an acronym that made total sense to begin with.
Right, totally. Dude, that's crazy. I did not know that. And we're already launching with some UFO conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not real caught up on the news, so I'd have to wing it. But at the time, something was popping and you and I started talking about it.
Dude, the news, my dad gets so mad at me because I don't ever listen to or watch the news. Like I'll watch Blazers news, as you know. I'll look at what's happening with Dame, but like, I'm not looking at anything else. It's a distraction.
Yeah. There's a podcast that I do listen to once a day and I zip through it, and it's they're independent. They don't have big sponsors. So I know that where the money's coming from. The money's not coming from, some pharmaceutical company or some corporate entity that makes me have to wonder, can I trust the news that's being given to me right now? But it's an hour and a half, and honestly, I'm fast forwarding through it to just get to the stuff. Like, I don't need to know where freaking DeSantis stands right now in the polling. Like, I don't care. But I am interested in, I'm interested in what's happening in Ukraine, as we all probably should be. And I'm interested in any economic news, although you and I get plenty of that from other places as well. But I do kind of zip through it. And in the midst of all of that, sometimes I get something that's news, and it's also fun when they start talking about UFOs or Bigfoot or whatever.
Exactly. Well, dude, let's kind of break down who is Eric Levin a little bit. So you've been in the mortgage industry for a really long time, right? Or at least mortgage adjacent.
Sure. Yeah. I started in August of 2000, maybe like at the end of August. And what that means is, and I started off as a recruiter. So prior to that, I had a degree in communications. I had worked on a master's in kinesiology. I thought I wanted to be in sport fitness. I was an athlete growing up and then got hurt and didn't want to be too far away from, if I couldn't play, I wanted to do something, but I didn't like school. I wasn't good at school. After that first semester of master's, I was like, I just want to go make some money and start working. So I was in New York City and eventually got married. My wife didn't want to live in New York City. She's way smarter than I am. So she was like, let's move back to Western North Carolina, where she was from. And at some point, I tripped on this guy that owned a recruiting firm, and his primary business was financial services. Not just mortgage, but kind of across the board. And what I remember the most about that is about 2 weeks after joining that company, I really didn't know anybody. I hadn't built trust. It was an older group. I was the youngest one. And then September 11th happened. And I'm in their conference room watching this unfold. So this was, what would that have made me? I was like 30 years old or something. And I remember just thinking how badly I wanted to be with my wife. Like, I didn't want to be with these people while this was happening. And it also, all of us that kind of lived through that as a young professional, that, we're smart enough to kind of understand what's going on. I did think, wow, is everything getting ready to change forever? It was one of those moments, right? And then I don't know if that triggered it, but from that moment on, I did view the company that I was with a little bit differently, which was, I need to figure out a way that I can pull something special out of this and not just work for the paycheck, if you know what I mean. Like, I'm watching this building come down. Life is too freaking short. I come from Eastern European Jews that fled the war, and some of which didn't survive the Holocaust. And I don't appreciate that nearly as much as I should. But I think in that moment where, these things were happening September 11th, I don't know. Maybe I got a little bit selfish, but in a positive way. Like I've got to figure out a way to do something that's more than just showing up and collecting a paycheck. And that sort of started my process of what could this industry look like for me? I was never a mortgage banker. I've never written a loan. But I've always been adjacent to it and partnering with mortgage professionals, whether it's helping them advance in their careers or helping companies add talent. And then that has sort of fast forwarded to where we are today, which we can talk about in a minute. But I am married. I've got 2 boys. Abe is 23 years old and he lives closer to you. He's out in Utah making his way. And then I've got my youngest son, Tate, is 20. Here, we'll get even more personal. So I was raised Jewish. I don't practice anymore, but I'm very proud of that, of my heritage and my culture. I married a Latter-day Saint. So my wife is LDS. My youngest, Tate, has been on a mission in London for the past 2 years, and he's coming back in 18 days, which I'm incredibly excited about because I haven't seen him for 2 years. And then my oldest, Abe, 23, he didn't serve a mission, but Tate, his younger brother, they're best buds. And so to get the family back together again in a few weeks is going to be something special. So anyway, I've been in the business that long. That's a little bit about me personally as well.
Okay. So you've been in the business about the same time I have. We both have sons named Tate. We both struggled through school and decided to figure something out for ourselves and kind of made the path that we wanted. It's crazy.
No, it is. And I remember when I first met you, I was super intrigued by what you were doing because I saw those similarities, right? And I talk all the time. It's for those that have never been involved in a startup, it's almost impossible to describe what that's like. You know, I joke around that I'm really, really proud of the software and the technology that we've built. If I think back to 10 years ago, I mean, I'm an idiot, man. I can barely use my cell phone, but we had this idea and this vision that we were able to get the right people around us to then create this talent management system, Model Match, the software platform, the SaaS platform. But if I'd thought about my younger self and that I would be involved in a SaaS startup, that's insane. But the other part that's insane is it takes a certain person to deal, as a startup. 1 minute you're on the top of the world and everything. I was joking around one day. I think I was with other startup founders and we were talking about, okay, at 7:30 in the morning, it's a whirlwind because your list is long and your calendar is blocked and you're trying to figure out how to get the little things in. At 10 o'clock, things are going great. You're crushing it. You're hockey sticking. At noon, a really bad problem happened and you flatten back out again. Then at 3 o'clock, you're hockey sticking. At 5 o'clock, you're going out of business. It's like every day is like this insane cycle that sometimes it takes companies 10 years to sort of witness. But it's also crazy. It's also kind of fun. You know, it's you're constantly problem solving. I don't know what your question was, but that was the ADD tangent I just went off on.
No, we can run down those roads. Dude, 2003 when I started, I read a Entrepreneur magazine had an article called Business Manic Depression, and it was the first time I realized I'm normal. Because I was reading about exactly what you just described, and there was a time that I remember rock bottom for me was like 2008 when the market had crashed, everything was horrible. And I was standing there looking at the guy flipping burgers at Burgerville. And I was like, that guy has benefits. That guy's getting a paycheck this week. Like, I remember thinking I should have just flipped burgers. Dude, that low. And then when I started getting booked to do gigs, I would fly back from a huge paid speaking gig. And every single time I walked through PDX, my airport, I would just smile and be like, I can't believe I got paid to do that. So you have the wide range. I do want to dive back into your childhood because you mentioned school. And this has been every conversation I have on this podcast is an exploration for me of how do people tick? How do they work? Do you remember your GPA?
Oh, it wasn't very good. As a matter of fact, I was at my folks' house several years ago. And my boys were there. This is long before Tate went on his mission. And you know how mom is, right? Mom's got your box of all the stuff that you had when you were a kid. And you didn't realize how insanely embarrassing that was going to be once you have kids. But all of a sudden I noticed my son holding up a piece of paper and it was like a report card from 7th grade or something. And it was so bad, Ken. And he's looking at me like, you're such a hypocrite. The way you jam everything down our throats. And now I'm looking at your report card. And of course, as a parent, what I got to say was, I just want you to be better than me, son. Like that. I did it the wrong way. But I don't know that I did it the wrong way, Ken. I didn't like school. I didn't like sitting in a classroom for, an hour at a time in a desk without being able to move. I'm a fidgeter. I have a lot of energy. I had acute sinus problems when I was a kid. So I was always congested, which meant if I'm sitting still, that congestion would get worse. And this sounds so nerdy and sissy boy, like when I say this out loud, but I do look back and I think that did make it difficult for me to focus. As soon as I would stand up, though, I didn't have a problem. So sports and physical activity was my release. It was the place where I could go perform and be successful. But no, man, my grades weren't good. Now I will say my grades were good enough though to get into college. I did get into college. I went to UNC Wilmington undergrad, and I liked college a lot. From a scholastic perspective, I liked college a lot more. I learned the importance of engagement with your professors, that, the professors that are good, they're actually there because they want to be there. And so they want to talk to you. And most of the classes I took were, you had to present or you had to write. It wasn't multiple choice, and multiple choice for me was a nightmare. Like I was always going to second guess myself and end up just choosing C every time. And then, making C's and D's, but college got a lot better. What college also taught me was the value of communication, not just because I was a communications major. It was really because I'm not naturally, you might find this surprising, but I'm not naturally someone who just wants to go up to you and have a conversation. I'm really fine being alone. Like I'm really comfortable and pretty happy doing things alone, especially if it's physical labor. But what I figured out really quickly in college was, if you'll engage with people, most of them want to help you, especially if you have a good idea and especially if you're willing to do the work yourself. And so my grades got better in college, but they still weren't that great. I mean, I was not a great student. Where were you? I think you and I have had this conversation. I actually figured out in college, I'm 51, so this is going back a little bit, but I remember being in a library. So it's a funny story. You'll like this one. So I didn't have a ton of money for college, right? So I tried to save every way I possibly could. And one way was, why would I buy that book for $125 if I can just check it out at the library? But somehow my friends didn't figure this out. Like, you could just go to the library, check out that $150 psych book. And then if you develop a relationship with the librarian, you just check it, turn it back in and take it right back out again. And then you have it for the whole semester. But one day I was in the library studying something and I tripped on a test for ADD. Now, I'm sure those tests are way different now. This is a long time ago. And back then, if you recall, those are things you didn't really talk about. Like, you didn't want to say that you had ADD or that you had these things. Like, now it's almost this strange, it's my identity is X, or I'm proud of this thing, or this is, even for some people, and not to start arguments, but it can be an excuse. Well, I took this test and I had ADD. But the beauty of that was then I read, well, what does that mean and what do I need to do? And I started figuring out, I have to put notes everywhere. I have to write things down. I have to engage differently. And then those things that can be a negative can actually become a superpower in a weird way. And so, that was not a good student, but better in college.
But you still remember that moment when you took that test and like,
I can picture the couch I was sitting on.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you get it confirmed at that point, or
say it again?
Did you go in and like have somebody confirm that and do further testing, or were you just like,
no, I didn't. I just took it and I was like, okay, whatever. What does that mean? What do I need to do? And then I didn't do a deep dive, but I did also sort of start paying attention to the things that generally come along with things like ADD or ADHD, which is, relatively high energy and generally a high desire for pursuit. Usually things like, if you're not actively pursuing something, you could end up having some level of depression. I didn't like that word back then because to me, depression sounded clinical. Depression was clinical. There was no in between, at least back then. But I don't want to be sad. I don't want to be mopey. And so, well, then get up and do something. You can't just sit here and play video games, or you can't just sit here and complain about your professor. You have to do something about it.
So it actually created a drive in you. Even more than already.
I didn't think about it at the time, but it did. Yeah. But I didn't go down the rabbit hole that you probably would have gone, because I know you're a mad researcher. You probably would have gone bonkers once you took that test. I was like, okay, great. Got it. I'm straight.
And then you just kind of figured out how to work with the superpowers.
Kind of. And it, again, here's where Ken Perry is way smarter than Eric Levin. You would have figured it out all in about a 1 month span because you'd have gone deep down that rabbit hole. I just sort of banked it and then would pay attention to things and would start to realize, this person's different than me. Their level of speed to the next thing is different than me, but that doesn't mean they're better than me or smarter than me. It just means that my process has to be a little bit different for me to eventually get there. My oldest son made pretty good grades in high school, and he was able to get into a college out west and get a little bit of scholarship money as well. And he is not a naturally good student for some of the same reasons that I was not natural, but he was a much harder worker than I was when it came to class. He would just be in his room for 3 hours. And I know what was frustrating for him was that why does it take some of my friends 30 minutes to do the same thing that it takes me 3 hours? It's not fun. He wasn't cool with it, but he did know I still have to finish. So if it's going to take me 3 hours, at least for the moment, that's what I'm going to have to do. There's also there's such better coaching now around those things than there was when you and I were coming up and you sort of had to figure it out for itself. I also wonder though, and I'm curious to get your take on this. There's a word for this and I can't remember what it is. If you openly talk about something, you then make it real. Potential. I know this, I've never been to therapy, but I do think that if I went to therapy, this is something that would probably come up, that the things that you push down, you're just going to fight through, because if I admit, or if I say, I think I might be X, well, then it becomes a self-fulfilling sort of prophecy. You actually become X, but are you really X, or did you just create this thing for other reasons? I think for me, that's why I probably didn't pay attention to it that much, because I just didn't want the label. I was like, okay, whatever. This is why people called me a underachiever when I was in 5th grade. I wasn't really an underachiever. I might have been an underperformer in this one class that you think I should do better in, but yeah, I think we've swung a little too hard in one direction now, though. It almost feels like we pull it back to a middle ground between where you and I were back in the day to where things are now, where everything's readily at your fingertips and there's a medical solution for everything. The answer probably lies somewhere in the middle.
It's so funny. My wife's probably going to kill me if she listens to this one, because she's a therapist specializing in ADHD. She's
going to complain. I tell her to comment all over everything I just said. That was wrong.
Well, no, I'll tell you, there's something to that in that, like, I hate it when I talk to somebody who goes, yeah, I'm probably some ADHD too, because I forget things. And it's like, holy, does it affect you in a very negative way on a regular basis? Because if not, then you don't really have a diagnosis at that point. But if you're constantly fighting through it, it's different. So yeah, I think people have embraced this ADHD thing. But for those of us who have dealt with it our entire lives, many of us have a very similar story. We know what that's like to deal with it. And then, some of us have dealt with it differently, but there isn't I'm probably kind of that too. It's like me saying I'm kind of OCD. I'm as far away from OCD as possible. But if I was like, yeah, I turned the faucet on and I didn't remember if it was on, that doesn't make me OCD. There's like a much bigger diagnosis for the brain difference. But I'm curious. It
kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, though, is that back then, there weren't labels for everything.
Oh.
Now there's labels for everything. So it's like I need to identify with a label as the reason why I forgot my keys this morning, or the reason why normally I make a left-hand turn at that light. Today I made a right-hand turn, so I kind of forgot where I was going. Maybe you're just cloudy today because you got 20 things on your brain. Like, that's okay. Yeah. It doesn't have to be labeled necessarily.
But our labels, for those of us who are ADHD or have it, our labels back then were lazy. It was forgetful. It was procrastinator. It was like anything anything that, for me at least, if I had to focus on it and I knew I was going to fail, I was like, why would I focus on something I'm going to fail at? I know I suck at school. So I had a 2.67 GPA in high school and a 2.33 in college, and then a 4.0 for the last 2 years of college because I got into communications and I actually cared about that. And so once I was like, wait, this matters? Like, I don't care about a lot of the stuff they taught me, but as soon as you got me like interested in something, I was all in. But until then, I was this failure. Like you're listed as a failure. And I think once you get into real life, like you did, you were like, wait, I'm actually kind of good at this stuff. Like the entrepreneur side, I don't know the number of ADHD entrepreneurs, but it's a freaking ton, including, you know, a lot of the ones that Sir Richard Branson and Tony Robbins and some of these guys where they've openly come out and talked about it. There's a lot of entrepreneurs who've got that. I want to go back to what you said though, because there's a difference in accepting a diagnosis like that and going, okay, well, that's why I'm a failure. So I'm going to, you know, kick back and live in this failure, which I know a lot of people do and they don't mean to, but that's like the response for a lot of people. And others are like, okay, let me, and for me and also for you, we did the math and went, okay, what does that mean? It means that explains a lot about my past. And now I have better advantages for my future. I don't know what causes that difference, but for you, you took it in as information and then you went, okay, cool. Like move forward knowing my tools. Does that come from somewhere? Like your parents, is that how you were raised? Are you an older child? Are you a younger child?
So I have a younger sister. She's a couple years younger than me. I was a latchkey kid. You know, both my parents worked. And so if I wasn't playing sports after school, I was riding the bus home and nobody was home. That wasn't weird to me. That wasn't bad either. There was a little bit of fending for yourself, I guess. So maybe that's a good thing once you reach these moments of, you know, you're better at this than I am, but that doesn't mean that I can't maybe do something similar to what you're going to do. You know, I don't know. I do know this though, for me, and I'm not saying this would work for everybody, but once I recognized that being outside, getting sunlight, doing physical labor was incredibly healthy, where that was my therapy. And then I became real, I hate this word, but I'm going to say it. I became very intentional about doing those things. Things got more consistent and more predictable for me. Now, it doesn't mean that they became linear if I look at the growth of the business as an example, or it became linear as it related to, you know, the success of your family as an example. But it did become more consistent and predictable, my ability to just show up with the same thing that was necessary to have the opportunity to win or to be successful or to success. But I want to table this because I want to talk about success. I would love to know how you define success. I was thinking about this over the last couple of days, but I think even back then when I was sitting on that couch and I did this test that probably has no scientific justification anymore because it was so old, that to me, it was like, well, I need to continue to be physical. I'm not someone that's going to be, I'm probably not going to be a doctor. I'm probably not going to be a lawyer. I'm not going to get through it. I'm not going to get through the classes to be able to get past the barrier to entry to actually perform as an attorney. Or, by the way, I didn't want to be an attorney. I never thought about being a doctor. But I did realize how important getting up early and being physical and having outlets, how important that was to so many other things. You know, there was one of our employees came into my office a week or two ago, and he's a former college soccer player. So he was, you know, good athlete. He was very fit, but he, you know, his life is different now. And he's in a job where he's under fluorescent lights and sitting at a desk most of the day. And his fitness had gotten beyond him, and he's still a very young guy. And so he started asking me questions about things he could do. And he joined the local gym, and he's back on track again. But he came into my office the other day. He said, you know what I noticed recently, just reading about successful people and businesses, and even looking on LinkedIn and those people that he feels are influencers and what he wants to follow. He said, it's amazing to me how most of them are fit. Mm-hmm. And look, I'm no gym bro. That's not what I am. Like I'm not espousing to go, how much can you bench? That's not that. But I am about even just grabbing a chainsaw on a weekend and spending 6 hours cutting up trees. Like that to me, that's a workout. That's physical labor. And we ended up this conversation about which do you think is impacting which? Is it the dedication to health and wellness that then breeds the outcome of success on the business side? Or is it the success on the business side that then motivates towards health and wellness? And I think we both landed it. they kind of work together, but it's the health and wellness component that has to be consistent and predictable, or else you don't get the outcomes of the other pieces. And so, by the way, that's not 100%, right? But I think we could both agree that most people that have had long-term success also take relatively good care of themselves.
That is interesting. And I've never even thought of it. I don't know if it's one way or the other. I do know I've been in some rooms of like masterminds of some top producing loan officers. I went to Todd Duncan's ALE event out in Kauai. And I remember like looking around the pool and going, oh, okay. Like there's something to this fitness thing, but I don't know that I made the crossover of like when you get that success, are you like, okay, what else can I win at? Or is it just like wired into you that I'm going to have goals for myself, and I'm going to have, a window of weight I want to be within, a window of muscle I want to be within? Because I think we all have that, for everybody. You have that window, and when you get like above something, you're like, what's happening right now? And below, you're like, should I see a doctor? Like there's that place.
Okay, so if you keep thinking about that, you're a parent, I'm a parent. One of the things that you've probably said to your kids in some similar way is, you do become the company that you keep. And so I'm not telling you shouldn't be friends with this person, but I am asking you a question. And that is, do these group of people, do they make you better than you would be on your own? And if the answer to the question is no, you ought to be thinking about the people you surround yourself with. Well, business is the same thing. One of the things that I'm now at this point where I've been doing this 20 plus years. And honestly, Ken, I started off as a recruiter working out of a cubicle, and nobody wanted a phone call from me. I mean, that's just how it kind of started off. To think now that I can call people like Ken Perry and Dave Savage and Sue Woodard and Kevin Perenio and people like that I can call them my friend, that I can send a text message and say, hey man, I'm in town. Do you want to grab an appetizer? That most of them would probably at least try to get together with me. That I do look at that and think, that's pretty cool, man, because 10 years ago, I would have thought, that probably wasn't in the cards. That's not the way that this would work out. But when we think about that company we keep, I keep company with you. I can pick up the phone and I can ask you questions that your answers will probably help me be better at whatever it is I'm asking about. Well, what about the other things? What about the food we put in our body? What about the drinks that we put in our body? What about the lack of sunlight? I mean, look, COVID was an incredible example of this, right? Either there was this line of demarcation where either people got way unhealthy or they got way healthy. How many people do we know that came out of the pandemic and you're like, dude, what have you been doing for the last 10 months? Like, I've just been hitting the gym. I got myself some TRX bands and I'm doing some yoga videos, and I just decided I'm going to cut out the crap in my pantry, and like, you look better than you've ever looked. And then the flip side of that is I just sat on my couch and waited for this to be over. And now they've got cardiovascular disease and high blood pressure, and they're overweight. You are who you surround yourself with, and you are what you put inside of you and what you push your body to do. And that those things have outcomes that can be really beneficial as well. When you think about a market crash, are you physically prepared? Not just financially, of course, and we could talk about financial wellness and those things as well, but are you physically prepared to withstand that next punch in the mouth? Because it's coming. It's always coming.
God, it's so interesting. During the pandemic, like you just described me and my brother. So he looks like a freaking fitness model now, and I'm doing better now. But like,
please stop it. You've always been fit. You're so self-deprecating.
I hit my high watermark in weight during the pandemic, but I also struggled, as mightily with my own mental health during that time. And my brother just went straight gym rat, and it totally correct on that.
And so it's also like, how do we react to that stress? Strangely, I've had total knee replacements. I have 2 total knee replacements. I had the first one when I was 44, 45, which is pretty young for a total knee replacement. And then I just had my second one in January. And I think part of this is I'm a little bit of a psycho. In a weird way, I sort of looked forward to it, because it was one of those, there's 2 ways you can react. Well, I guess I'm just going to be in my bed for the next 6 months while I'm recovering. Or it's, bring it. Let me see what I can do. I want to pretend to be Dame. I want to pretend to be a professional athlete. I'm not a professional. I don't have trainers. I don't have coaches, but I can pretend, isn't that quote, like, be the superhero of your own movie, right? Of your own life movie. In that moment, I get to turn on Rocky music and fight through the pain and look at my leg atrophying and me coming out of shape. But man, I'm Rocky in this movie, and you look at me in the next 60 days, and I can either succeed or fail in that. But if that's my mentality, I'm probably more likely to come out in a better place. Like, I got to go through the pain anyway. With the pandemic, with the market crashes, you can't control that, but you can control how you react to it. And by the way, I'm saying this partly every time I say things like this, I'm reminding myself, because I fail all the time at it. Sometimes it's easier to just do nothing, or to put something unhealthy in my body, or I want to sleep in a little bit later. Although I can't do that anymore. I don't know about you, but something happened years ago. It was like, even if I wanted to sleep in late, it's just not possible. My body's like, nope, it's 5:30. It's time to get up.
Yeah, mine's 5:45. Actually, it's so funny. I don't set my alarm on weekends. And so a 7 a.m. wake up time would be insane. And my wife's like checking to see if I'm alive, because she wakes up crazy early. And we just had this conversation on the weekend. I woke up at like 7:30 because I stayed up playing video games with my son. I do that sometimes. And so I slept till 7:30.
Nothing wrong with that. I mean, I said video games earlier, but there's a healthy balance of everything.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it's with my son. Like, that's my son time, right?
100%. That's right.
And Mindy's like, so you're going to sleep the day away? And I'm like, that a ton of people aren't even awake yet, right? Like, I'm not being lazy right now. It's 7:30. But
I don't think our marriages are so unique. Yeah, they're all the same.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So you just basically, you jump up and you get after it. And that, it would be interesting to read like multiple success books from people who we would term as successful, and go, okay, what time do they wake up? What time? Like, I love those studies that they do to try and find those consistencies and go, all right, well, that leads to, but then you go, is a successful life leading to that, or does that lead to a successful life? Right.
Oh my gosh. I'm really into this right now, because I think a fault of mine, even though I think about it more, which I think is helpful, is I should enjoy the journey more than I do. I'm always so focused on the next thing that probably needs to be solved that, and look, my wife, Nikki, is the best. And she, if it wasn't for her, I probably would never do those things, but she's pretty A-type herself, but she's really good at, it's okay to just sit down for a minute. It's okay to just breathe for a minute. It's okay to not worry about the next thing. I don't think worry is even the right word. Worry is not the right word. It's just constant solution mode, if you know what I mean. But I was listening to this speaker. It's so terrible. I can't remember his name. You may know this guy. He wrote a book that when he was like 19, 20 years old, where he was able to get interviews with people like Bill Gates and Steve Wozniak and Mark Zuckerberg and even some actors and actresses. And basically the book was around, what makes them successful? What are the things that they've done, the tricks, the tips that leads to success? And so we were in this room of, 200-300 people, and I was just in the audience, and I asked the last question. So he opened it up for Q&A for 15, 20 minutes, which I thought was a long time for a speaker, but whatever. So I asked the last question, and the question was just simply this. You've told us all these tips around successful people and what makes them successful. But my question is, do they think they were successful? If you were to ask them, how do they define success? What would the answers have been? And he told a great story, and maybe you knew the story, but I didn't know it. It was the story of Jobs and Wozniak. And Wozniak wasn't the one that got the executive level title because he just kind of wanted to be a programmer. He wanted to be down with the guys that were building the product. And so Jobs got the title, and Jobs got all the accolades. And as they were going public, and I didn't know this story. I should have known this story. As they were going public, some of the early employees came to Wozniak and said, hey, there's no employee stock option plan. So when we go IPO, I don't know what's going to happen to me. And Wozniak was like, that's got to be a mistake. That's not possible. Of course you've got something coming. So he went to Jobs and he said, we need to we need to do this if we haven't. And Steve Jobs, who, by the way, I have nothing negative against Steve Jobs. It was just a conversation between two, what we would envision wildly successful people. And Jobs said, absolutely not. We're not going to do that. So what did Wozniak do? He took a portion of his equity and split it up amongst all these other people. And so instantly, when the stock went public, you had instant millionaires, right? You're in the Pacific Northwest, so you're used to a lot of these instant millionaires. But in Western North Carolina, here in Hickory, we're not used to that kind of thing. So it was really cool to hear that story. But what he also said was him having dinner with Wozniak, he was the happiest person of all the people that he interviewed. And so let's go back again. Is the scoreboard money? Is the scoreboard customers? Is the scoreboard, your wins and your losses and your deal making? Now, Wozniak was a wildly successful, wildly wealthy human being, but clearly that's not how he was keeping score. So I'm intrigued by that. So I guess I would ask you, when you think about defining success, what does that even mean? I mean, how do you define, is Ken Perry successful? And don't look, you and I are friends, so don't give the answer that everybody thinks or want. Like, I'm just curious if I'd like to hear some off the wall sort of answers. Like, because dude, I don't know.
Do you know what your scoreboard is? You go first.
I mean, I think the older I get, it's a little bit of legacy, right? It's how are you going to be remembered? Is what are people going to say about me? And I'm not talking like, oh, he was super cool or he was really popular, but was I good to people? Was I helpful? Did I do the right thing even when it wasn't really what I wanted to do, if you know what I mean? But also I'd like to think that some people around me, I help make their lives better, maybe. But okay, let's total honesty. We're on the couch right now doing therapy. I'm driven by the scoreboard still a lot. Like I want our business to be the most successful SaaS platform in the industry. I want our employees to make more money than they could have made anywhere else. I want to look out in the parking lot and see fancy cars that, somebody couldn't have afforded a couple of years ago. But I think that if and when that day comes, I think I'm going to find that that actually probably would concern me then all of a sudden if I saw those things happening. So I don't know, Ken. I think I'm wildly driven by whatever it is. I don't know that I've pinned it down yet. I think I'm a little schizophrenic with that notion.
Dude, it's such an interesting concept because, I mean, even thinking about it, like I obviously need to journal this because that's where I'll figure this out. But there's certain things that for me, I don't think I'm ever there. Like I've never achieved in any area of my life where I want to be. And so I don't look at the scoreboard because I know I'm losing. And that's what drives me to go still try and win.
So are you more, okay, I got a question for you. I don't remember if this was it could have been part of a disc test. It was some personality thing I took years ago, which by the way, I think you're into that stuff. I'm into it, but yeah, you are. Cause I know we've talked about
Enneagram is the only one I believe in.
I push back on him a little bit, but I'll throw you a question. Do you think you're more driven towards success or away from failure?
Towards success. Yeah.
Really? Go. Tell me more.
Yeah, I think when I first started the company, I was driven away from failure. Like it was just I hope I don't lose. I hope I don't lose. Like it was definitely that. Once you have some success in like we had the company started being successful, it was like, oh, I like the taste of this. Like we can actually do some things. And so it's driven towards making a difference. My whole life is driven by making differences in other people's lives. And so if I'm doing that, I'm winning. I'm not scared that I'm not going to do that because I believe I can do that and we can do that as a company. And so I'm way more excited about that success than I am about the possibility that it doesn't exist. I guess failing doesn't really cross my mind because we're just going to figure it out. But that's also 20 years of owning this company has taught me that through whatever we go through, there's going to be positive on the other side of it.
So I think I flip-flop. Just total transparency. I think I still flip-flop. I'm driven by success for sure, but I'm constantly redefining what is success? Is it a evaluation? Is it that there's a point in my life where I don't need an income anymore? Is it? And then I think maybe fear of failure is not the right way to put it. I value the fact that failure, the possibility of it, is always right there. Because it is to me that then it is that motivator to stay one step ahead or two steps ahead of whatever it is. But it is, I think I wasted a lot of energy on chasing statistics I see the statistics now as an outcome of other things versus writing it up on the vision board and saying, we're going to go chase that number. In having spent so many years talking to people about what do they want? People, if anybody watches this that's seen me present before, and not on all my presentations, but in a couple of them, I use this clip from the movie The Notebook. You see the movie The Notebook? You ever see that movie? Okay. So there's that scene where Ryan Gosling is talking to whatever the actress's name is, and he built the freaking house for her. Like, what else do you have to do? He went to war, he comes home, he builds a house. Like, if that doesn't get the girl, well, then we're all doomed, man. And so she's trying to please her family. He's trying to win the girl. And there's a point where he starts saying to her, I know you know what everybody else wants. What do you want? And he just keeps saying it over again. What do you want? What do you want? When we think about, business and identifying your strengths, your weaknesses, what you like doing, what you don't like doing, and then the company that you're with, the business model that you've attached yourself to, and you start to think and audit, does this model allow me to get the things that I want? Which, by the way, should be directly tied to the things that your customers and your referral partners want. They can't be independent of each other. But it's amazing to me how many times people can't really answer the question, well, I want a better tech platform. Okay. But what does a better tech platform do for you? I don't know. I just know mine's not very good. I need a little better rate or a little better price. Well, are you sure that better rate and that better price is going to lead to 3 more units a month without doing any extra work? And then, oh, by the way, you do realize that's something you can't control. So as soon as you have it, you might not have it anymore. It's the difficulty of people identifying what it is that they want. And I think the really successful ones have identified that. And it's the company that they're with becomes almost less important, Ken. It's taking advantage of the things that they know will get them, their customers, and their referral partners to that place that gives them what they want. And I think I'm personally constantly in pursuit of that as well.
How do you figure out what you want? Like, my wife talks about living by your values, like figure out your values and then everything else is a lot easier. How do you figure out what it is you want?
Well, honestly, man, for me, it starts at home. I want my wife to be happy. I told her this a long, I was like, man, maybe it's me or maybe it's men in general. We're really simple. I'm really simple. When I come home, if something's bothering you, I want to either be in a position to fix it. And if something's bothering you, I want to be sure it wasn't me that did something. Like, I want to make sure that I wasn't the one that caused this if you're good and she's the foundation of our home, including our kids, well, then if she's good, the kids are generally better than they would be without her being good. The home is good. And I draw energy from that. And then I think that spills over into my business partners. I want my business partners to be good. I want the team that we work with to be good. And that's a tough thing, but I think that's the first thing for me. And then if they're good, generally I'm a whole lot better than I would have been without them. I had to learn a long time ago, and I bet you did as well, that I can't scale myself with myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I could do things that make me more efficient for sure. But the only way I can scale whatever it is I'm good at is to have other people around me to create multiples of that thing. And then hopefully I create multiples for them also, maybe. And I kind of learned that through building tech also, is that, if you're going to scale something, you can't get caught in the things where human capital drives that down. And I don't mean people. I don't mean that we start firing everybody. I just mean the tech has to create. What's the value of tech? I was thinking about this also recently. Technology and iPhones and Samsungs and SaaS. What we found very quickly is it has a deflationary effect, right? Because it creates efficiencies. I've got a TV over here on the wall that's got CNBC up, which, by the way, the only reason there's CNBC up is because it seems like it's the thing that should be playing in my office, not because I really pay attention to it that much. But, I'm looking at this television that, honestly, when I think of the technology behind that TV should be $10,000. Mm-hmm. I can go to freaking Costco and get that thing for $400. Mm-hmm. Yet it costs $30,000 a year to send my kid to a state school for college, which is inflationary. Like, that's not deflationary. But then when you think about that relationship, it's because the tech creates efficiencies, which then allows for scale, which then becomes deflationary. And then I look at myself in the mirror and say, do I do a good job of that? Do I help others to help them scale? And then do I allow them to help me scale? And I have struggled with that one. I'm not always very good at delegating. I'm not always good at teaching someone to fish as much as I should. But I've gotten better. And tech and SaaS has taught me the importance of those things.
All right, we're going deep with a question here, and this is probably going to end up being the longest podcast we've done, which I did to you, so you can do that back to me.
Chop mine up into two. That's just what happens when we get together.
No way, it's one. Let's go deep. I asked you, we're kind of like, what's success for you, and what's your scoreboard and all that stuff. Everything you said was about other people. It's making them happy, making sure their lives. How much do you feel responsible for other people's happiness?
Definitely my immediate family. I feel pretty responsible for it.
And your business partners and the people in your world. You mentioned them too, and like making something for like you're driven by making something that can help people, right? You've always been doing that, right? It seems like you've set your life up to support everybody to make them better themselves. That's a big deal for you.
I think so, but I also want the reward. And maybe that is the reward. Maybe when you and I are 90 on our deathbed asking for mushrooms, I'm going to realize that actually was the reward. I think I'm at a point in my life where I'm still trying to convince myself, what is the reward? Is health enough? Is knowing that my kids are, healthy and going to college and making their way, is that enough? Is knowing that my wife is healthy and we have a nice home and a nice life, is that enough? Or does that competitor in me always allow other things to get in the way, which is, as the path that I've chosen, I've done perfectly fine. I have a nice life. I have a nice home. I've been able to take care of my family. My wife and I both have. My kids have gone to nice, good schools. They've never struggled to eat. They both had cars when they were of age to have a car. Those are things to really be happy and proud of. Yet in this industry, Ken, we're surrounded by people that are relatively average at what they do and make obscene amounts of money. Right. And I get caught up in that sometimes. Like, gosh, well, maybe 15 years ago, I should have just run business development for this other company and never chased this dream of building something kind of cool. And it would have made the economics so much easier. Maybe I could actually envision retirement, right? Where right now I'm just still scratching and clawing, and I'm okay with that. But then I go back to this. How do you define success? And I'm pretty confident that when I'm laying on my deathbed, I'm not going to say, I wish I would have closed one more deal. You know what I mean? Like, I think we're both pretty sure of that. And so it's the simplicity of things. And I do think that as much as I don't I shouldn't say proactively, I'm not drawn towards just being around people all the time. I absolutely do see the value. My wife is the one that taught me the value of service to others. And yeah, I don't know, man. That's a great question. I probably need therapy.
Everybody needs therapy, dude. And one last thing, how much, you've mentioned your wife multiple times in here. My last interview I did was with Josh Pitts, and we were talking about, yeah. I made the comment to Josh, I think we have an unfair advantage having somebody balance us. And I don't want to know the Ken Perry that didn't have that. that's obviously been a big part of your success, right?
Man, 100%. I mean, it's the ultimate partner. I mean, we talk about business partners, but that is the ultimate partner. It's the most important decision you'll ever make in your life. If that's something that you want, or you're lucky enough for that thing to find you. And, I almost missed out on that opportunity. I was living in New York when, my wife and I had been dated, we dated for 5 years before we got married. But that last year I was living in New York and she was living in North Carolina, and she hit me up and she said, I know I love you, but I'm picturing my life and there's things I want. I want a family. I want kids. I want the house. I want the whole thing. And if you're going to be in New York and I'm going to be here, it might not be in the cards for us. And I flew home. Well, I flew to Greensboro, which is where my parents lived at the time. She picked me up at the airport and we drove to Hickory, which is where I live now. That's where she's from. And we just locked ourselves in the room. We kind of went for a walk, essentially. And we talked about, what do you want out of life? Kids and money and schools and geography. And Nikki she knew exactly what she wanted. And it was very simple. It was very foundational. That's probably the better way to put it. She knew at that time that she said, I'm not working when the kids I'm raising my kids. So I don't care how we have to live for me to pull that off, but I'm not going to work. It's important for me to raise my kids. And, I'm thinking, well, we might be living in a van down by the river, but I mean, if we can make it work, let's go make it work. But she brings me back to that foundation. And yeah, to your point, without her, I don't have a clue, man. I don't know. I don't know what I'd be doing, and we wouldn't have these two awesome kids that are part of this world that I think will make the world better. And I know you feel the same because we've talked about this before. We've talked about our families. But her foundation then makes me good so that I can come here and deal with the great stuff and the fires and in technology, it's, go break it and then figure out how to build it back up again. But without that foundation, I probably have thrown in the towel a long time ago.
Yep. I'm with you. All right, dude, we're cutting off there because we have already set the record for longest podcast on Lessons for Last Time. Always a freaking pleasure. I love the way this went. It was just such a great time talking to you. I could talk to you, for hours, and we do. So, dude, thanks for joining us, and I will see you next time.
Yeah, much love, brother. I appreciate this.